Great. Okay, so the workshop's called Crash Course, Photographing and Editing Your Art, and we'll get into it. So first, why is it important to take good photos of your art? Well, you gotta have your art documented, and this is very important for sharing your work, especially online. And with school being online in the fall, you'll have to take photos of your assignments, and it'll also be very important for your career because you're going to have good photos for your online portfolio and also sharing it on social media to get a wider audience for your work. And you got to have good photos because they have to be professional to give that high quality look, and it gives a good first impression. Because if you have a bad photo of your artwork that it's a bit blurry, the lighting's not too good, whoever sees it might be like, it could take their attention away from the artwork and more looking at the photo. So we want to take away that element of being like, what's with the lighting here? For just the focus to be on the artwork, because that's what you want to shine, right? And yeah, taking photos of your art is a useful skill that'll be great for online school in the fall. And also something to note with all the photos that I took in this presentation, I took them with my phone camera. These are kind of general tips for taking pictures of your art. That could be done with a fancier DSLR camera or with your phone camera. So for photographing art, the first thing you have to do is to set it up. So you're going to have your background. You want it to be clear of distractions, and I recommend using a minimal color. You could use white, black, or a neutral color. I personally like black or white. Depends on what's on the artwork. If the artwork's something that has a lot of dark colors or a dark rim, I use white. But if the artwork's very light, I use black so that I can see it better, and also for editing. So as you can see in the photo on the right, I have my little setup on a table. There are other things on the table, but the piece of paper that I was taking a photo of was quite small, so I just moved everything out of the way and put my background on it. To save money, something that I do is I try as much as I can to use what I have. So you can see I use my sketchbook as a black background. I also had this one book that has a nice white back, so I use that too. So you don't necessarily have to buy things to take photos of your art, because as students we like to save our money as much as we can. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. When you can, save money. And the next part of setting up your art for taking photos of it is to have good lighting. I recommend using natural lighting. It's free. And also it's the best lighting. So something to get natural lighting would be to go by a window or to go outside. You could go to a park and go to a table and take photos of your art there. I've gone outside to take photos of my artwork, and some people will look by, but it's not too big of a deal. People kind of just mind their own business. You get used to it after a while, and the photos are great because the lighting's lovely, and you also kind of are out in nature, so that's nice too. You could also get good photos for social media outside. And then sometimes you can't always take photos with natural lighting. Sometimes you have to do it when it's darker, or what you're taking the photo for is different. So in this case, you want to have good lighting. So if you need to, add an extra light source. Like you see on the photo on the right, there's a lamp that's lighting a plant. So especially for 3D artwork, you might need more light sources. So add one if you need a lamp you have at home, or if you really don't have any lamps, you can buy one. But something to keep in mind when you use other light sources is to make sure that it emits white light and not yellow light, because with a lot of the lights we have that are used for nighttime emit yellow lights, and that makes our photos look yellow, and that adds another editing process which takes longer and might not come out super great. So that's why we like to use white light for lighting our photos. So now we're going to move on to talking about taking the photo. So when you're taking your photos, avoid shadows. Yeah, just avoid shadows. So beware of casting shadows on your work, like yourself with your body, like your torso or your hands, and your camera, whether it's like your phone or a fancier camera. So as you can see on the photo on the right, there's something that's blocking the light that's incoming from a window, and it's casting on the paper, and it changes a lot how it looks. You might not be able to tell with something that's more detailed in an artwork, but that's also why I used a plain piece of paper to show how much it does affect the look of the paper or art. And then we also have to remember the angle. Very important when it comes to taking the photo. So for 2D artwork, we always like to have our angle straight on, flat. And this is important because when it comes to cropping our photo in editing, we want to make sure that those edges line up with our artwork. We don't want anything wonky or distorted like we see on the right side, especially when it comes to taking photos of flat work. When it comes to taking photos of 3D work, we want multiple angles. We can have straight-on angles, but also angles that are more not straight on. So some examples of multiple angles would be like the top, the side, a 3/4 angle, and so on. As you can see with this little die. I think that's singular form. Anyway, so with this object, I took the side, the top, and a 3/4 angle. The side and the top kind of look the same because it is a cube. So now you have to review your photos. Always remember to review your photos before you clean up your setup, because sometimes you'll be looking at your photos after the fact, and then it'll be like, oh no, this one's blurry and this was the best shot I got. So you always need to check your photos before you clean up so that if you need to take the photos again, that you can do that without the hassle of having to set everything up again, because sometimes that takes a while. And something to keep in mind is that don't be afraid to take multiple photos of one shot, because you can always delete the photos later. And I personally think it's better to have more than less when it comes to photos, because you can delete them, and also there could be like minor adjustments, like maybe one's on slightly more of an angle than the other, and then the one shot you have is like totally straight on and it's great. And when you're reviewing your photos, be sure to check for anything that you can't change with editing, like are there blurs, is there shadow over my work, and how's the angle? Is it a bit like slanted, a bit distorted, or is it a-okay? So here's kind of an overview of what we talked about for taking photos of your artwork. We start with the background. We want to have it clear of distractions. We can use a minimal color behind our work. And then we focus on lighting. How's the lighting? Natural lighting's pretty good, and add more light sources if we need. And then don't forget about the angle of your artwork. For 2D artwork, it should be straight on, nice and flat. And then 3D artwork, we're going to take multiple angles of our work. And don't forget to avoid shadows, something when you get caught up in taking photos you might not notice, so that's why we got to keep it in mind. And then don't forget to review your photos before you clean up. So now that we've covered that, I want to ask you all, the audience, what's working and what's not working in this photo? What's bad and what's good? You can help to go back to this checklist and just like put down in the chat something that you think isn't working or something that you think is working with this photo here.
Can you see the chat, Leia?
Oh, no, I cannot.
Okay, so I'll read it out to you because people
Okay,
are sending.
thank you.
Yeah. So there's the plant is covering the paper. There's a shadow over the page. The plant is blocking the light. The paper isn't flat on the table. The angle's okay, but there's shadows. There's too many items all over. And it's kind of dark.
That's great. Yeah, all great answers. So you picked up on lots of good things. Here's a bit of a summary of the things that I quickly noticed. Like you said, background's kind of messy. There's lots of distractions. The pencils are everywhere. There's shadow on the work, as well as the plants in front of it. The angle, well, like you did say, it isn't completely flat on the surface. And what you could do with this is, if you want, you could take little pieces of tape and put it on the back of your work to stick it to whatever surface it's on. Whenever I do this, I don't put the tape on directly because I don't want it to take the paper off the back. So what I do is I take the tape and then I have a piece of fabric like my pants, for example, and then I kind of just stick it on and then take it off like 3 times so that it gets some of the fabric that's on like the piece of fabric, and then I put it on the back of my artwork and stick it down to make it more flat. So there's another tip. Yeah. So now we're gonna move on to talking about photos for social media. So taking photos for social media, it's more fun and a lot more creative. And the rule is like basically aesthetics over everything. So remember all those rules I just told you about, like having a straight on angle for 2D artwork and all that? Well, you can throw those out the window as long as it looks good. Like the photo you see in the bottom left corner, that one's at a that one's at a distorted angle, but it looks kind of cool, so it's okay for social media, but not for the assignment you'll be submitting on Canvas. For that, we want something straight on. So some suggestions for photos for social media are to add objects into the photo to make it a bit more interesting and fun. Things we can add are plants, beads, the materials you use to make the work, like pencils or markers or paint. And then you can also play a lot with the background, like the colors that are in the background, the texture, and so on. So just like have fun with it. It's a good time. So now we'll move on to editing your art. So here's an overview checklist of the things we'll be covering today. The first thing I do when I edit my art is I crop it, because why keep things there in the background that you're not going to need later? So I crop it, and then I move on to the next section, which is lighting. Things that we can do to adjust the lighting are exposure, levels, and brightness. I'll get more into how to use these adjustments and what they mean when we're actually in Photoshop and editing those photos. And then the next section I go to is color. So I look at things like color balance, saturation, and hue, and vibrance. And then after that, I go into like imperfections in the art, like blemishes. So for this, there could be like, let's say you have a drawing of an apple, but on the side of the apple, you have this like black dot, which was a mistake when you were inking, and you don't want that to be there. You can take that away with a number of ways. So you can do that with the spot healing tool, the brush tool, the lasso tool, plus the fill tool and content aware, or the clone tool. Again, I'll get into these later when we're in Photoshop. And something to keep in mind is to compare it with the original work and the digital photo to see if it looks accurate. Because what we're kind of going for is a realistic depiction of what the artwork looks in real life. So now we'll get into that. I've got to change my screen sharing. But first, I'm going to send in the chat the first photo that we'll be editing. Let's see. Okay, so it's sending right now, but there's the first photo that we'll be editing. Now I have to share Photoshop. Okay, can you all see Photoshop? I'm going to assume yes and continue forward.
Yes.
So I've also, okay, great. So also in Photoshop over here, I decided to load the image of the checklist so that we can just refer back to it as we're going along with our editing. So the first thing that I have on my checklist is to crop. So here I have my image. It's one of the ones that I'll be using for social media. and I'm going to crop it. So first, I'm going to go on the left here and click the crop tool. So I'm going to click it, and then it has these little lines all around. So I'm going to drag it to where I want it to go. I think that looks pretty good. Let's see. So I'm just dragging it, seeing what I like. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going to press Enter or this check mark up here to apply the changes to the cropped image. And something to note about the crop is that I like to have delete cropped pixels unchecked so that if I want to go back later and change the cropping, I can. So I'll show you all that when I click it, you can see that the original image is still there behind the image, and I can use the little lines here to slide around and adjust it. So there we go. First step done, cropping. I'm going to go back to our checklist, and the next section is lighting. So exposure. Okay, so now we're on the adjustments to our image part of our workshop. And there are two ways to do adjustments in Photoshop. I'll show you the first way. It's to go to Image, Adjustments, and then to select one of these. We'll do exposure since it's the first one. And then over here, we're going to have our sliders pop up, which you can slide up and down to change how you want it to look. I'll put it on very bright for dramatic effect. And then I'm going to click OK to apply the changes. The thing is with adjusting your image like this is that this image has now been permanently changed. And if you can see on the right with the layers, it's made those adjustments directly onto the photo. I'm going to show you all another way of doing adjustments to your photos. So now I'm going to click Control-Z to undo those changes that I did with image adjustments. So the second way of doing adjustments to your photos is to do it with adjustment layers. And to do that, we go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. Sorry, my throat. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then we're going to select one of the adjustments, make that layer, yes, okay. And now we have our sliders here again. So we can slide them up and down to change our image. So I'm just going to keep it super bright so we can see. And I'm going to go here to layers to show you that a new adjustment layer is basically a layer that has the adjustments, and then everything that's under that layer has those adjustments applied. So as you can see over here, we have our layer over here, and then our digital images under it. And now I'm going to click this eye icon, which is the visibility of the layer. Right now it's on, so I'm going to click it, and now it's off. So as you can see, I can have this layer here, and I can toggle it on and off to see how that adjustment looks on my original image. I like using adjustment layers because it doesn't permanently change the image. So it like temporarily changes it in a layer, and then you can always change the adjustments later, and it doesn't permanently change your image. And I think that's great. So I'm going to toggle it on, and I'm going to double click this icon here, and I'm going to change that adjustment. I'm going to go back to layers, and I'm going to toggle it on and off. And see, same layer, but it's now been changed. So I'm going to delete this for now. And that's how we do adjustments. So now I'm going to go back to the checklist and start going through this lighting section. So the first section thing to do is exposure. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Exposure. Create the new layer, yes, okay. So the first thing to do is just like play around with the slider. I like to make it brighter or darker and then slide it towards what I think looks nice. I think that looks good, so we'll leave it at that. And I'm going to go back to my checklist and go to the next section, levels. So levels kind of deals with the shadows in an artwork, and I'll show you what I mean by showing you. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. Make that layer, yes. Okay, and over here you see this little gray arrow. that's in the middle. So I'm gonna click this little arrow and drag it to the left or to the right. So as you can see, when I drag it to the left, it kind of makes the image more washed out. And then if I drag it to the right, it's more harsh. So I like to make my images a little more with some more shadows, so maybe use that. That's a bit much though. There, I think that looks cool. And something to keep in mind is that you can always type into this value here to change how it looks as well instead of using the sliders if you prefer that. So there we go, we've done our levels. Now to the next section of the lighting, brightness. So I'm gonna go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Brightness, and press Enter. I'm gonna use this, and okay, for brightness, it's kind of the overall brightness of an image, how light it is overall. So I can make it darker or overall brighter. Let's see. I think that looks pretty good. It's not much change because we have the other lighting adjustments that have already like affected our image. So that's why this one is 3. It's not much difference. I'm going to toggle it on and off to see the change. Not big, but still a change. So that's great. Now our lighting section is done. Now we're going to move on to color. Color balance. So color balance is used to make sure that the whites in the photo, like the color, the tone, looks white and it doesn't look blue or yellow, because oftentimes we'll have that. Sometimes the white will actually be like a bit blue or a bit yellow, depending on our lighting and where we took the photo. Like if you take the photo at night at home, your dining room will probably have yellow lights because that's kind of what we use for nighttime. So the whites there might look a bit yellow. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Color Balance, and make that a layer. And I'm going to use on this yellow and blue section, I'm just going to use the slider to go up and down to see what I think looks nice. I think that looks good. So now this image has more blue, and I'm going to toggle it on and off to see how that looks. Looks good. So there are 3 different sections of color balance: cyan red, magenta green, yellow and blue. Most of the time I just use yellow and blue because that does the trick. At times, like you might notice if your image is like, I don't know, a bit magenta, then you can adjust the magenta slider. Okay, now to go to the next thing on color, saturation. So I'm assuming that you all know what saturation is, but it's kind of how rich your colors are in an image. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Hue and Saturation, and make that a layer. And with the saturation slider, if you slide it up, you can see that the colors are a lot more rich. If you slide it down, they're a lot more like faded. So I'm going to play around with the slider, see what looks good, toggle it on and off. I think that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to go to the next section, which is hue. So hue and saturation are in one adjustment tab thing. So there are 2 ways to adjust hue. You could do it in the same one as you do for saturation, or you can do it in a different one so that you can toggle that one on and off and see what works. So that's what I'm going to do because I like to toggle things on and off to see how the change looks. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Hue Saturation, and make that second hue saturation layer. So hue kind of changes the overall color of the image. As you can see when I'm sliding it down, it's like completely changing the colors. And when I slide to the right, it does that. So if you want, you could play around with this if you're getting into more like artistic photography or something that could be fun for social media. But I think overall for me, the colors in here are pretty good. Maybe, let's see how this looks. Maybe I'll do like -3. It's like a very small adjustment, but it still makes a bit of a difference. And I'll put that there. So now the next thing on our list for color is vibrance. It's also kind of how rich the colors are. I'll just show you how it looks. So Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Vibrance. Make that a layer? Yes. I'm going to slide it up to show you what it kind of does. This is kind of what it looks and slide it down. So I think Vibrance is a more subtle adjustment depending on how you use it. I don't see much, but I see a bit of a difference, and I think this one's nice, so I'm going to keep it there. Great, so now we've got our general photo editing for lighting and color done. So now we're going to move on to blemishes and the little imperfections in work. So over here, you can kind of see that there are some black ticks on this piece of paper, this drawing, that I don't want there. So I'm going to take them away. So the first way to do this is to use the spot healing tool. So first I'm going to zoom in with Control+ or Command+ on Mac to get a closer look at those little imperfections in my art. So I'm going to use the spot healing tool, which is this little band-aid on the left. So I'm going to click that and then go over my imperfection. So I'm clicking and doing that. That's weird, it's not working. What? Sorry, I just want to check quickly if... Oh wait, I know what happened there. So I'm going to click open layers, and it's because I had it on an adjustment layer. So this is something sometimes I forget, but very important to remember after you do your adjustments, you're done your adjustments, and you have to go back to your digital photo. Because right now you see I was on the Vibrance adjustment layer. So you're going to scroll down and click the layer here. But something very important to remember is to always duplicate the digital image when you correct for imperfections. Because sometimes you'll make a little mistake and it's like, oh no, what have I done? I can't reverse this now. So that's why we always save a copy in our file of the original digital image. So we're going to duplicate this layer. There are two ways to do that. One is to double click the layer and drag it to the little sticky note here, which is to make a new layer, and then you let go and it makes another layer. Another way to duplicate a layer is to right click on your layer and then go up here to duplicate layer. I'm going to click that. It'll ask you to name your layer, and then you're like, okay, that works. So that's two ways to make a duplicate of your layer, but I only need one. So I'm going to delete this one up here. I'm going to click the delete key, or you can click the trash can down here. So now that we're on a new layer, we can start editing out the imperfections. I'm going to go to the spot healing tool and kind of just click and go over this little line. So you don't see much difference, but it has gotten lighter. I'm going to do it again. Because the thing is, the spot healing tool is meant to take out some blemishes on people's faces. But sometimes it works for what we need in our art, but not always. In this case, it didn't. It didn't. So there are different ways to take out imperfections in your art. And we'll go to the next one on the checklist. The next one is by using the brush tool. So I'm going to click the paintbrush tool here, the brush tool. I'm going to click that. And then I'm going to use Alt to get the eyedropper tool and then click the color that I want to grab. And then I'm going to click over this imperfection. Oh no, that doesn't look too good. So what the brush tool does is, it paints the color over part of the art. And in this case, using a single color over the imperfection didn't work. It kind of looks more glary than it did before. But there are other ways to fix imperfections in art, like I said, so we'll go through those. So right now I'm going to undo this change with Control-Z to undo it. I'm going to go back to my checklist, and we're going to use the Lasso tool plus Fill plus Content Aware. So the Lasso tool is here. It kind of looks like a rope, a lasso, and I'm going to carefully go around my little imperfection, and we go carefully around it because we want to change as little as we can with our art so that it's not glaring and obvious that we've edited it out. So now you can see that it's selected over here. There's little marching ants around it. And then I'm going to right click to get to fill. I'm going to click fill. And now I'm on the fill options. So there are different options for fill, as you can see here. but we're going to use content aware, which it's kind of already on anyway, and we're going to click OK. So what content aware does, it grabs the image from around it, and it kind of does its Photoshop magic and puts that over the imperfection. And now it worked, but we still have our little marching ants on our screen, so I'm going to click Control D to deselect that area. And it looks great. Imperfection's gone. But I still have some other ones on my art over here. So I'm going to go back to editing my photos. I'm going to use the clone tool. So for the clone tool, I'm going to use this little stamp here. I'm going to click it. And what the clone tool does, it basically grabs, it clones the piece of the image where it's targeted. So to make a target, I'm going to click Alt, and you have this little target icon. I'm going to click near the imperfection because I want it to be similar and cover it. So I'm going to carefully go over that over there, and boom, it's gone. Great. So now that we've covered all of the ways to fix imperfections in our art, I'm just going to quickly do the others, and we'll move on. So I'm going to use the clone tool again, click next to it, and then go over the imperfection. Same thing with over here. And each time you use the clone tool, you have to redo the target where it's targeting, where it's grabbing from, and press Alt and click, because where it's always going to stay where it was last targeted. So that's why you have to reset it every time, because you're going to be moving across your work to fix these little things. So again, I'm going to click with the target, and I'm going to go over that line. And you can kind of see the little X that's on the screen. Oh, oops. Okay, so see, that's why we always reselect, because it might go on to somewhere we don't want it to. Okay. Great, so now we're through our checklist, and remember to always compare with the artwork that you see in real life and the one you see on the digital image, because you want them to look very similar. So I'm going to zoom out with Control 0. So now we're on full view of our work, and it's been edited. So one last thing I like to do just for fun when editing photos, and to also see how much editing really does to your photos, is to click the original digital layer, and then I'm going to click Alt, and then the eye tool, I'm going to click that on and off to see how all of the edits have affected the work. So as you can see, we have our imperfections gone, our lighting and color makes the image look so different, so much better, so much more presentable. It's great. So that's our first one done with the checklist. And now we're going to get into editing a two-dimensional artwork, which is flat, and we're going to make this one look like it's scanned. So I'm going to quickly drop that in the chat. Let's see. Did it send? Yes, okay, there, it's sending. So that's our second image we'll be editing, and we're going to make it look scanned. So the first thing we do is crop. I'm going to go faster with the explanation is now that I've covered everything in the checklists. So we're going to go to crop.
Oh, Leia, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
We have one quick question, which is when you click beside the blemish, are you clicking Alt at the same time?
Yes. Okay. I'll show you all that feature again right now. So I'm going to zoom in with Control plus. So with the clone tool with the blemish, I'm clicking Alt right now, and then we see the little target, and I'm clicking next to it. So I'm holding down Alt, and I'm pressing the click so it's down. Then I'm releasing my click, and now I'm releasing the Alt. And now I'm moving my cursor without clicking. And now I'm clicking down to go over the imperfection. And as you can see, there's a little X that's showing where it's grabbing from where the target Alt is. So I'm still pressing down. And now I'm going to release the click, and it's gone. Does that answer your question?
They said yes. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to click Control 0 to zoom out and fully see this artwork. So now we're going to crop it. Our first step, we want to align our crop with the edges as best we can, and that's why we take the flat artworks straight on so we can get this as best we can. Sometimes you might have to crop out the edges just a bit, which sometimes I have to do. And now that's good, so I'm going to press the check mark, and I'm going to press Control plus to zoom in. And you can see over here, there's still a bit left to crop out, so I'm going to do that. My scanner doesn't work too great, so that's why I kind of prefer to just take images of my artwork and then make them look like they've been scanned. So if you don't have a scanner, this could be something that you do. There are also scanner apps out there. But yeah, so because I want this to look scanned, I'm first going to go to the checklist, and we're doing lighting. But because I want it to look scanned, I'm just going to go straight into levels and show you a little trick. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then Levels. Make that layer? Yes. So here I'm going to press the white eyedropper tool and then click on my artwork where I want it to be white. Because what the white eyedropper is going to make, wherever you click, it's going to make it white. So I think the white looks the darkest here in my artwork, so I'm just going to click that, and bang. It's white. So pure. So that's great. And there's also one for black. This is the black eyedropper tool. So I'm going to click that and click where I want it to be black in my artwork. And there we go. So that's done, and it looks nice and clean. And because that's taken care of, we don't really have to do the other editing options for lighting. That's something to keep in mind when you're editing. You don't always have to do like all the steps. You kind of just take what works and what doesn't. So now I'm going to go to color. Since the white is already pure white, I don't have to do color balance, but I'll do some saturation. So I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Hue Saturation, make that a layer, pull the saturation up and down. I think I'm going to make it a little less saturated, more like the artwork I see in real life, like, comparing the art and comparing what you have on your screen. Use the toggle visibility to see how that change is affected. Great. Okay. Moving on. Now I'm going to go to Blemishes. I'm going to use the brush tool now. So, before we make the changes to our imperfections in our artwork, we're going to duplicate the layer. So I'm going to right-click this layer, then I click Duplicate Layer, make that a thing. Okay, so now on our duplicate layer, I'm just going to use the brush tool. Over here, I'm going to click it. And because our background is pure white, I'm just going to draw over with whites over the imperfection. So I'm going to go here to colors, press this because it's white and black. And then I'm going to switch the color so that the white one is in front, and that's the one I'm drawing with. I'm just going to go over these little imperfections. Zoop. Okay, that's done. Great. And that's it for our checklist. We compared with the original artwork because, like, looks good. Oops, wrong one. And there we have it. There's our edited two-dimensional artwork that looks like it's scanned. Now we're going to go onto a 3D object and edit that photo. But you all are going to help me with editing it. So I'm going to put this photo in the chat, and I invite all of you, the audience, to let me know how you think I should edit this photo. Let's see. The image is loading. Okay, great. Can I go over the lasso tool and content aware? Yeah, I'll be doing that. Okay, so Anil says to crop it. Yeah, so I'm first going to crop the artwork. I think that this shot is kind of good, but I'll still crop it for demonstration. So we're going to crop it, and let's see. Strange, it's a bit laggy now. Okay, so we're cropping our art. There we go. Enter. I'm going to crop that a bit more. But what's the next step we should do after cropping our art? Let's see, I'm going to go to the chat. Anyone have any suggestions? We can look to our checklist to remind ourselves what should I do next?
Can you see the chat, Leia?
Yeah, I figured out how to see it while also presenting. So levels, I dropped the black area. Yes, that is what we're going to do now. Great answer. So I'm going to go here, level, new adjustment layer, levels, make that a layer, black eyedropper tool, and then I'm going to select the black. But before I do that, I'm going to first make a new duplicate layer of this so that my physical changes to it aren't done. Oh wait, no, that's later. Anyway, it's always good. You can also do this step at the beginning so you don't forget. But yeah, layer. I'm going to double click this little icon to see the changes again. Black eyedropper tool, click where I want it to be black. Yep, looks good. That's great. So now I'm going to go to the next part of the checklist. Let's see. Let's change some of the exposure to make it a bit brighter. Exposure. Yes, okay. I'm going to slide this up and down. I think that looks a bit more like it does actually wait a bit. There we go. So I'm like comparing it with my artwork. What's the next step should I take after adjusting the lighting? Should the shadows of a 3D work be visible on the surface or should they be concealed? This, good question. This depends on your preference. Sometimes people like a little bit of shadow in their work. Sometimes people don't want any shadows. So I think it's personal preference. Personally, for me, it depends what I'm doing. Like sometimes, yeah, personal preference. But black is good for getting rid of shadows. It's harder to do it with white. With white, if you want to get rid of shadows, you have to add more lighting and then maybe do some editing to make the shadow disappear. So now that we've done our lighting, I'm going to go into color and adjust some of the color balance. So I'm going to go to layer, new adjustment layer, color balance, make that a layer, move that around a bit. I think I'm going to make it a bit more blue to make it look like it looks in real life. That looks good. I'm going to go back to the checklist, go to saturation, layer, new adjustment layer, saturation, and play with the slider. It's a bit more saturated. I think it looks fine. And now I'm going to go to blemishes. So I'm going to zoom in, Control plus, and get rid of some of these scratches. So I'm going to go to the layer, going to go to the duplicate layer, and now someone asked to use the lasso tool to pull in content away again. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to click the lasso tool. I'm going to go around this scratch patch and carefully go around the scratches here to make them disappear. There we go. Now it's selected. I'm going to right click and go to fill and then contour and press enter. And boom, it's filled. I got to remember to deselect that area. And as you can see, poof, it's gone. I can toggle this visibility layer to see that change in effect. And I'm going to quickly do that with some more scratches to make them go away. So there we go. And now we're going to compare it with our original artwork. See how that looks? I think it looks good. And now we're going to move on to one last photo. So I'm just going to edit this photo as I would in normal time so you all can see how quick you can get once you know how to use the adjustment functions and familiarize with Photoshop and photo editing. So I'm going to do this very quick. I don't think it needs a crop, so I'm not going to crop it. I'm going to look at lighting. Layer, new adjustment layer. I'm going to do the exposure, enter. I pull it up and then pull it down to see what I think looks good. I think that looks good. And I'm going to go to layer, new adjustment layer, levels, enter. Play around with that. I like to have a little bit more shadow in my work. I think that looks cool, nice. Brightness, I don't think I need to do that. Now I'm going to go to color. I'm going to go to color balance, layer, new adjustment layer, color balance, enter. make it a little more blue or yellow. Let's see, a little bit more blue, maybe a little less. Change that value there. Gonna go to saturation, layer, new adjustment layer, saturation, enter. Gonna make that go a bit up and then down. I think that looks good. Toggle on and off to see the change. Cool. And blemishes, I'm gonna fix those quickly. I'm gonna zoom in. I'm gonna use the lasso and fill content aware. So I go around the imperfection, right click to select it, fill content aware. Oh, did it? All right, I forgot to duplicate the layer. See, I still make this mistake a lot. So duplicate the layer, and now it's physically on that layer, not one of the adjustment layers. Fill content aware. I'm gonna do this for the other ones too. Selecting around it. Oops, that's a bit too much. Selecting around it. Right click. Fill content aware. Deselect. Clone stamp tool. I'm going to target the area next to it. Click. And then go over that line. And this is why you have to be careful with the clone tool, because sometimes you'll